All right, I in fact did not have the patience to get this out the same day, but we're here now, so whatever. All right, now if for some reason you were watching this one first, Cradle attacks Kowloong. There's also a guy named Schultz. He is a mechanoid, like an AI, a living AI, who was once part of Gestalt. He was a test consciousness that was part of Gestalt, and after his creator, Lando, tried to delete him, his daddy issues spiraled out of control, and he decided the whole race had to pay. All living organisms have to go to make way for his world of machines. So no more humans, no more punishing virus, because that's still like a living organism in his mind. Right? Those two work together. They attack Kowloong. Kowloong gets kind of slammed, which, is the first time fighting hetero creatures. And the first time they fight hetero creatures, they fight the most dangerous entity on the planet. So, a little unfair, right? Kowloong basically just got to Limgrave, and they're fighting not even the Tree Sentinel, they're fighting the Nameless King. So they were having a pretty bad time. Chu comes back, then she dies, then she comes back to life, then they beat up Schultz. And Cradle just kind of leaves. Welcome to your 30-second rundown of the chapter. Alright, while editing, I kind of remembered that I didn't talk about the Schultz robot. As for the robot body, I have no idea where it came from. It's not 100% explained. If you want, you can just say that, maybe he did the same thing that Akasha did to Chu and just manifested the body. But more than likely, it was just a defensive robot that was somewhere in Kowloong, and Schultz put himself into it. Some parts of the chapter, you have to overthink. Some parts of the chapter, if you overthink, it gets more confusing. This is one of those parts. Don't overthink it. He just found a robot somewhere. So the thing that keeps getting mentioned is this computing power lock. I feel like that's the same thing as them talking about the limited computing power. They just gave it a different name. They just gave it an official name. It doesn't seem like anything different. It just seems like now they're starting to focus on it, which is probably something we'll deal with the next chapter, considering the next chapter is, with the computer girl. But as for, we got a lot of characters, right? Chu comes back, of course, and this will be my litmus test to determine how well I did in this video. I just want you to think, right? After having seen the video, or read the chapter, whichever one, do you think Chu is a good person?
I need to suck Chu Shukra toes.
I hope after I asked that question, there wasn't an immediate yes or no. I hope that you had to take a moment of silence to think about it, because that's what I was aiming for. That's what I was aiming for, at least. Chu's not really a good or a bad person. She's just an individual who has a goal and will take steps to accomplish that goal. What does that make her? Neutral good, I think? Neutral good, right? I don't know. I'm not that big on D&D. But I also really like how, over the course of the chapter, you can kind of get hints that she's not as hard as she tries to portray herself to be. When Jiang is giving her over the screw to signify he's handing over Kowloong to her. She's like, oh yeah, I can handle it. I got it. Because that's her job, her duty. That's the calling that she has as an heir. So she knows that she has to do it. But deep down, she's kind of do I really think I'm capable of doing this? Am I really prepared? Am I ready? And that's why we always see her as this person who tries to distance herself from people. She tries to act like she doesn't care, but she really does care about these people a lot. She believes that she lacks human emotion and that she can't understand human emotion. Right? She's like, I'm not a person. I'm just a machine who is here to help sustain Kowloong. But that feeling that she has is that human emotion. Is she really does genuinely love the people of Kowloong. Even above her own life, to the point where she is willing to sacrifice herself for it. And then we have our main antagonist of the chapter, Schultz. Right, as we said, he is a test consciousness that they were using in Gestalt's development. So all those stories that you were seeing in the middle, like him as a soldier and him as like a writer and an adventurer, those are just all story scenarios that they put the consciousness Schultz into. So they're just like stories. But to him, because he is that code, those were his actual lives. The first two weren't too relevant, right? They're just like stories to build up. But that last one, right, something odd happens, and I'll probably touch back on this later, but, you know, something odd happens and he meets with a weird figure. Who, you know what? No, I'll do it now. He meets with this weird figure, right? This entity, right? This higher being, said that they took a liking to him and somehow accelerated him through the simulation and brought him to the end of that simulated universe. And there you see Nanami, and just that glimpse of Nanami was able to spark his eventual awakening, which I guess makes Schultz the actual first awakened machine. But going back to that entity, right? So it said that they were just interested in Schultz. I don't think that entity was an observer. One, because we know what observers are at this point. I think if it was an observer, they wouldn't be trying to, like, you know, hide it and be secretive, because we know what observers are. But you know what we don't know? We don't know what the entity who was talking to Nanami, who was in Gestalt, right? Way back in chapter 18, there was that random being that was like, we saw what you're doing and we can help you. And it's making me starting to think, like, we got two machines and both of them were reached out to while inside of Gestalt. Like, we've seen Ishmael talk to Gestalt, but we've never seen her, like, interact inside of Gestalt. So I'm thinking, you know, we have this one being who we have seen interact with only machines, assuming they're the same thing. This is all assuming that those two beings are part of the same team or maybe the same being. They are interacting with mechanoids, right, with Nanami and Schultz. But then we also have another higher being, which is the observers, and that one seems to be more like humanity aligned, because it was, you know, wanting the human side, which was Lee in this case, to join them. That's all I got right now, but we'll see if I think of something else. We also learned that Schultz was involved in a whole lot of stuff behind the scenes. He's apparently been around since chapter 1, right? Before chapter 1. He was inside of Nozzle, and he apparently taught Nozzle how to use the virus for power, but not succumb to it. And after he left Gestalt, he tried to... Okay, so small tangent here. He was part of Gestalt, and then he left Gestalt, and then he was trying to go back to Gestalt for some reason. Me personally, I'm thinking it's because, you know, Gestalt was trying to delete him, and it was probably taking a whole lot of, you know, energy and power to keep himself from being deleted. So he left to, like, you know, solidify himself, just to, you know, so he's not under constant pressure of deletion. And then after he, you know, got like a breather, he was like, okay, cool. Now that I've, you know, learned a bit more, grew a bit more, understand a bit more, now I'm ready to go back and challenge Gestalt. So he's inside of Nozzle, and he's trying to get back to Gestalt, and we find out that the reason the virus was able to get into Gestalt's deep well is because he used Nozzle, and they were breaking through defensive lines trying to reach Gestalt, and that created a path for the corrupted to get through, and they of course brought the virus. We also see that he was the one who erased Strikehawk's memory after they defeated Chariot. He was also on the spaceship during Arc Beyond when Trailblazer and Hikma were attempting to hack into Gestalt. And he also says that like ship permit that they were using to fool Gestalt systems, they're like, that's not why Gestalt let you in. That would have never have worked, apparently. It was all part of Gestalt's plan to let them in, because Hikma, just like Nanami, is like one of those desired outcomes of the machine consciousness experiment, and Gestalt like wanted her to be there. Which there is a line during the scene where Asimov is looking through the report, and the line says that MPA1, which I think that's supposed to be Hikema's designation, but it's saying that Hikema and Nanami will be the keys to the future, and that makes sense because, you know, Nanami is the one who's set to fulfill the Her Last Bow future, and Hikema did, in a way, kind of determine the future, because during Arc Beyond, she was given the choice between taking the design files and going back to Nanami. We learned that Schultz also stole data from Fort Winter, and he gave that data to the Cradle hackers, and that's why they were using human consciousnesses to make their, like, Huashu clone and trap people on the mountain. That was all because of Schultz. When Buddy went missing in Chapter 24, Buddy was led away by Schultz, and then he's found by Cradle, who, you know, tells him to get out of Buddy, and then she takes Buddy and does, you know, what she does and turns him into Fenrir. And then while they're in the forest, they decide to work together and attack Kowloong. Okay, I was back editing again, and Cradle said 2 weird lines that I feel like should be brought up. So one, she called herself one of Cradle's wills, and I guess that makes sense. Like, if Cradle herself is a will that's within the punishing virus, then she should be able to, like, manifest herself in, like, multiple places, or, like, send out avatars, because, you know, it's not the Cradle that we see in the hood isn't Cradle herself. It's just a manifestation of the will that's within the punishing virus. So that made sense. But the big line right here, she's talking about Schultz, and she says, "Oh, you're weird. You don't get corrupted by them." And I think the fact that she said them is really interesting, because she follows it by saying, "You seem to have your own will." So when she says you don't get corrupted by them, it sounds like she's talking about other wills, which of course goes back to the chapter 26 thing, where we find out that the virus/network is composed of a bunch of different wills. And that would also explain why the punishing virus can't turn humans or things with human consciousness directly into corrupted. Because as we see in the chapter, if there's something already there, you can't just overwrite it. Right? So because these vessels, like the human body vessel and like the constructs and the awakened mechanoids, they already have consciousness and they already have wills inside of them. So the virus can't just come and push that out. That's why it just decides, okay, I'm just going to kill you. Right? Because I can't push out your will. It's already there. And if I can't get you that way, then, you know, I'm just going to make your body fall to pieces. There's also a little bit with Pulao, which I cut because Pulao has been like not doing too much here. Apologies to all the Pulao enjoyers, but she just gets a little bit of catharsis, right? You know, since she became if you didn't know, she can't remember like her past, like prior to becoming a construct. And, you know, Hikema had her memories, and she was like, "Pulao, I have your memories. I can give these back to you if you want at the end of like Floating Reverie." And she was like, "No." So she takes her memories and her parents' memories and she uploads them into Akasha. And then during the final fight, Pulao gets to like meet her parents, and she finally starts to like remember everything that happened. And, you know, her parents do the whole like, you know, "We're proud of you. You know, you're doing what you need to do for Kowloong. You know, live life." So she gets that moment. And the thing she does is she actually carries Chu out of Akasha and takes her to the Emperor boss arena. Because you see Chu, she like gets stabbed at the bottom of Akasha, and then she wakes up in a whole different place, and like Pulao's next to her. And you're like, how did that happen? That's how. Pulao dragged her over to where Emperor was. There's Duhong, and I didn't have anywhere to put this, but she is Zesh's aunt. I don't exactly know how she's her aunt. My assumption, my headcanon is that she is Ma's daughter. So like Qiling's sister. And like my only reasoning for that is that when Ma volunteers for the suicide mission, she's like very adamant about, "No, please, you can't do this." And I just feel like she'd be a little bit more, you know, like that if he was her father. as for why they're so cold, like, to each other, is because during the outbreak, Duhong was in Babylonia, and Chu ordered her to stay in Babylonia and not to come back to Kowloong. So, to the rest of her family, it probably looks like she just abandoned them, because we also hear that she hasn't contacted anyone in Kowloong for like 40 years. 30 years. Obviously, because also Kowloong had the signal jammer barrier, and they didn't even get discovered until chapter 12, so she couldn't have contacted them even if she wanted to. So they're probably like, you're dead to me now. Of course, we have Ma, right? Chi Ling is his son. We have Lando, who was the scientist who used to work at Kowloong, and then he got called back to lead Section 3, right? He built Gestalt, and one thing I find weird is that when Gestalt is talking about who created who, Gestalt is saying that it was created by Dominic, and that Schultz was created by Lando. But I was like, didn't we just read like 7 nodes of Lando creating Gestalt? What do you mean Gestalt was created by Dominic? So I'm thinking like maybe they're saying that like Dominic is like the father of AI as like a title, so it's just listed as Dominic, but whatever. If it becomes important later, I'll make a note of it. But we see that he also has this really rapid mental decline. Okay, maybe not rapid, it took like 8 years, but by the end of the project, he has this massive mental decline. Like, he's really happy and like cheerful when they start. And over time, right, his peers, they die off. But they are able to like leave things behind. They have people to carry on their legacies. They have like students. He sees like Valentina, she has like a daughter. And by the end of the project, I think he kind of realized that he's like all by himself. He's alone, right? His friends, co-workers, they're all dead, right? Korolev, Lebowitz, they died. His family, he has no family. His wife and child died at this point in the story 30 years ago. And he doesn't even have like a student to leave behind because, Villiers really does not like humans. And he had no interest in being like, you're my teacher now. So it's really sad. But yeah, at the end of it, he's like, all I have is this temporary machine, which I don't even really get the credit for because they're going to erase everything about it. So I leave literally nothing behind. And I guess that kind of took a toll on him, and he kind of was like, man, that's not it, and checked out. So this is a part that I cut. I probably shouldn't have cut it, but I didn't write it very well. And by the time I recorded it, it was just really grossly worded and I didn't like it. So I just cut the whole thing out. But very briefly, there's a section where you check in with the church and you are introduced to Amina. At least I think this is the first time we meet her. I'm pretty sure this is the first time we meet her. No, yeah, it is. Unless I'm tweaking. But yeah, you meet Amina, who is the Empress. And you learn that she was in America with Nanami and they were working on their like communication network. The only point of that scene really was to, 1, introduce Amina, and 2, to tell you that Schultz was in Kowloong, because I kind of realized that I didn't actually tell anyone, hey, by the way, guys, Schultz is in Kowloong. He just kind of shows up with Han Ying. But yeah, that scene is supposed to tell you, like, she goes looking for Schultz, and then they tell her that, no, Schultz is in Kowloong with Han Ying. So, like, now you know, okay, there's a guy named Schultz in Kowloong with Han Ying. So then when you see him, you're not confused. Apologies. But I also like how, despite them being the Emperor and the Empress, they do not get along. They do not like each other. She takes, like, every precaution to avoid him. They're like, oh, you can go to Kowloong and talk to him if you want. And she's like, nah, he's a creep. I guess she nailed that one on the head. She reminds me of the Queen of Hearts from Alice in Wonderland. Okay, another insert. I just keep forgetting to talk about this because she's never relevant. Like, Arcana is never, like, mentioned doing anything, so I always forget to talk about her. But I do not trust Arcana at all. She is so sketchy to me. And she has been ever since, like, the Her Last Bow Arc Beyond time. All the way since then, I have not trusted her at all. Because way back in Her Last Bow, You hear about how the church split in half, right? Zero started her rebellion and split the church in half, and Arcana did nothing to help. She was just like, well, whatever, my robot babies do whatever they want. Cool. Then we get to... That incident left a really sour taste in my mouth. I was like, So clearly she has no qualms about ending humanity. Nanami doesn't like that. And then we get to Arc Beyond, and she of course does her thing, but like when Hikima joins the church, she has this like bright red crimson flag moment where she goes up and she's like, oh mother, because Arcana likes to be called mother. She's like, oh mother, come here, your halo is crooked. And I don't know where you're from, but where I'm from, a crooked halo means sketchy. Alright? That flag was so red, I thought we were back in the USSR. It was ridiculous. So since then, I have just been waiting. I am waiting for Arcana to do something behind Nanami's back and start some type of civil war. I just have to get that off my chest. Okay, back to regular programming. Moving on to Jiang. So, right, he does his thing, and then when we're listening into the meeting, right, they hear that there's an accusation going on about his family, his clan, embezzling funds. And the significance behind the line that Chu brought up, right, make sure you guarantee punishments, right? So if you commit a crime, make sure there's a punishment for it. Don't favor people who are close, which means don't let people who are close to you get off. And don't like neglect to reward people who are distant, who do good work. But the point of that was his family, like the rest of the clan, thought that they were untouchable because they were, in his inner circle. They were his family. So they were like, he's not going to do anything. He's our cousin, so we can do what we want. The night of the blackout, he let the Yazi crew, I think the Yazi crew go wild, and they assassinated all of those corrupt officials. And that's why his family began to ostracize him and Yin. Yin too, but Yin was because he was taking like the heat off of his father so that they wouldn't catch on to his plan. But yeah, that's why they began to kind of like distance themselves from him. And you might be like thinking, but he's like the monarch. How can they do that? They still have like a clan structure. So he might be the king, the monarch, the ruler, but he's also still part of that clan, right? That family. And he might be the head of Kowloong, but he's not the head of the clan. That is the grandfather, Jun. And there's Liszt, right? So the thing that I cut out from him is he's listening to Asimov go over his like findings with Commandant. After he learns that Babylonia can do interstellar travel with like regular engines, he like runs out of the room, and we find out that what he was doing is he made another proposal and he gave it to Hassan, and he was like, hey, I just learned that Babylonia can go into space with conventional engines. We should totally go back to that. And he wants to get up off the Earth so bad. But we also find out he has a little bit of a personal connection to it. So Dawn 3, right, the spacecraft that was launched from the Tsiolkovsky Center, his father, Buzz Liszt, was like one of the like command central people who was in charge of that. So I guess his motivation is like, my father proved that this was like a feasible concept, and I want to put his like research, or I want to put his project to use, right? He spent his whole life like working towards using regular engines for travel, and I want to show that like he had a purpose, it had a purpose, so now we can go. His life's work had meaning, something like that maybe. But as for Dawn 3, right, it's just kind of this proof of concept, right? Just to give you an example of it actually is possible to shoot spacecraft into space, right? We did it with this one here. But then we also hear that there was a bunch of people like on the spaceship. I thought it was a probe. No, it's not a probe. It's an actual spaceship. So like, better question is, did they just kill 40 people? Like just shoot them off into space? Have them drift off? Just shot those guys off in the vacuum of space? They're gonna come back to Earth like, hey, yo, guys, what happened? Also, random fun fact is the guy who was in charge of Dawn 3, his name is Captain Nemo, and I just think that's funny. Also, he's only like one of like 2 named people, so might as well drop his name in there. Alright, so as for the chapter as a whole, like I said, it's not a bad chapter, like when you read it by itself. It's just that when you try to start comparing it to stuff, right, like it follows some absolute banger chapters, so, you know. An 80 looks real bad when you're coming off of like a 95 and a 112. Me personally, one of the things that I thought was kind of questionable is... Actually, no, let me say. It works really well as a Kowloong chapter. It's a very good Kowloong chapter. In that regard, I think I could give it like an A. As a whole chapter, I give it a B. Because when they try to connect it to the whole like United for Humanity idea, it doesn't work, right? Because Kowloong has been so self-centered over the course of the game. Everything Kowloong has done has been, you know, we have Kowloong and we have everybody else. It's Kowloong and the others, right? So when we get to the end of the chapter and like Chu is now talking about like, we are united humanity, right? We will work together. I'm like, Chu, you're the main one who's like, get out of here. It's Kowloong first. Like, you are the main one. You pieced off for like 3 years. I think the reason it works so well in Aeon Reforged is that Aeon Reforged wasn't a Forsaken chapter. It was a Watanabe chapter, right? And it was just following Watanabe, not the Forsaken. And we know that Watanabe himself is all about human unity and helping people. Like, we look back in the story, and every time there's an issue, Watanabe is there, first in line. Right? Space Station, I'm there. Kowloong, he's there. Train, I'm on it. The battle against Chico, front lines. So when he talks about, you know, unity this, unity that, I'm like, okay, cool. And then we see his dad come in and have his conversation about unity, and I'm like, okay, cool. That's where he gets it from. Makes perfect sense. He's very, very consistent about his ideas, the ideals he follows. But, you know, in all fairness, this is the section of the story where they're trying to unite all of the human factions. So Kowloong can't continue to be like, us, me. And, you know, they have to start somewhere, so might as well start now. Also, the pacing is really, really bad. If you actually read the chapter, you'll notice that there's a lot of stuff out of order, and that's because the way they have it in the story, it's just like read for like 11 straight nodes. And I'll be honest, even me with my lore obsession, I was getting tired of it after like the second straight node on Schultz's backstory. But yeah, pacing was rough. Let's see. So there's a couple of other little things. So the Grey Tower, which is the church's network system, they claimed that it was under attack. I don't know who would be trying to attack the church's communications. I assume it was supposed to be Schultz, and the reason Schultz was doing it was he wanted to crash the communication system so that Han Ying couldn't call for help, and so that the church wouldn't find out what was happening to Kowloong. Because they mentioned in the chapter that the church has been helping Kowloong out a little bit. Like, they help escort citizens to the main center. And of course, Han Ying is there and she's helping out. So, you know, Nanami has, you know, declared that they won't hurt humans and that they'll help humanity. So, you know, he cut both the church and Kowloong off so that they couldn't communicate, they couldn't tell anyone what was going on. Because we see that as soon as they found out what Schultz did, you know, Xavier was on top of it. And he phoned up the big boss. And Nanami, you know, put the smile away. That smile turned into a frown. Schultz is cooked. I also really like the scene of Trillard, where we hear Trillard's, like, scheme to get money for the world government. Like, don't misunderstand. That entire scene is not for, like, oh, I want to protect people. That was a plan for money. That was all money driven. And it shows that Trillard, you know, he is, you know, this slow going happy dude, But he's that happy dude because when he gets serious, he turns into a monster, right? He's got a dark side too, which I kind of like because Nicholas says the same thing about Hassan. He's like, hey man, Hassan might look nice. Keep him on that happy side of the line, because if he crosses that line, he'll end up worse than me. And we see, Trillard is where he learned it from. He learned from the best. Dark Chu, of course, Dark Chu is a what-if scenario that Huashu predicted, right? Because Huashu was running through a billion simulations trying to predict stuff, and that future was just one of the futures that she predicted. And Huashu was trying to keep it like contained, but because of getting double teamed by Schultz and the virus, that bit of data was allowed to roam free. And that is just the version of Chu who had absolutely no restraint and just decided everybody got to go. And we learned that she could be like some galactic threat if she didn't have self-control. Okay, so let's see, what do I have for lore with sparkles on the side? All right, so the Schultz stuff, right? We have the entities. I think I'm pretty sure I went over that already. But like I said, I think they're different from the observers. So we have a lot of weird stuff, and most of it comes from the Dominic Gestalt talk at the end. So first, right, Dominic is talking about a rebellion against some higher beings. I can't begin to understand. I'm choking up. I can't even speak English. I can't even begin to understand where that is going, what that line is supposed to mean. Because unless there's some third party of higher beings, because I don't believe the higher being is the observers, right? Because we see the observers and, they seem to be more on the side of humanity, right? Ishmael was like, hey, Lee, come join us, right? You did good. Or at the very least, she seems more helpful than unhelpful, right? She helps Lee out a little bit in the tower. So I don't think they're the ones that Dominic is worried about, which only leaves the question mark beings that are talking to Nanami and Schultz. But the thing is, Gestalt has its faith in the awakened machines. The awakened machines are Gestalt's plan. So if these beings that they're rebelling against are reaching out to the mechanoids, are they trying to get around Gestalt? Maybe? I don't know. That's such a random line. A rebellion against higher dimensional beings? What? Sticking on the Dominic train, right? We learned that Dominic is actually more of a group or a symbol than a single person. We know there is one singular Dominic because that's the one that entered into Reactor 1, but there also appears to be other people who took on the position of Dominic or the mantle of Dominic over the course of the years. So that's a little interesting. We also have this invitation that Dominic gave Chu. And to be clear, just to be super clear about this, the Dominic that Chu was talking to was the same red Dominic that we've been seeing talk to Gestalt. It was that one. It was that AI Dominic or memory data Dominic that crossed over to Huashu to talk to Chu. Unless I'm going crazy and it's the real Dominic who crossed time and space. But I think the other idea is a bit more plausible. But we have Dominic's invitation to Chu, and no idea what it is, but maybe it's supposed to be Commandant's key into the tower, right? Because all the keys to the tower look a bit different, right? Lee's key was the hetero shard in the language of the virus, and that's how he was able to use the tower. Vonnegut has his egg, so then maybe Commandant has this invitation, whatever that is. We also have Dominic's line at the very end that says what makes you think that we only exist in the past? Now, I don't claim to be the most literate person on the planet, but my reading comprehension is telling me that this line has two possible meanings. One, it's that we, as in Dominic, so that the line is saying that what makes you think that we, Dominic, only exist in the past? Meaning that Dominic also exists in the present. Or, which this is the one that I believe, we means humanity. So it's saying, what makes you think that we, humanity, only exist in the past? Which would mean that humans also exist in the future. So the line means either that Dominic exists in the present or that humanity also exists in the future. Which is some like actual interstellar type stuff. Okay, so let me explain. Okay, so let me like explain this in like extremely blunt terms. So at the end of the battle, right, when Huashu is taken over by Schultz and, the virus is running crazy in Kowloong, right, Schultz takes over Huashu, and one line that they said is that pillars of white light burst forth from the ground, right? And you're like, what are these pillars? It's not like an explosion. It was pillars of pure information. Now, I don't know if that information came from Schultz or like whether Akasha did it specifically. Like, I'm fairly certain the information was from Akasha, but I don't know if Akasha is the one who did it on their own. But these pillars of light came out, they just appeared, and like the thing that Ishmael was talking about, right, the law of conservation of energy, and they were saying that perhaps it also applies to information. And what that's saying is that you can't just get rid of the information that makes up the punishing virus. You have to, either transform it or replace it with something else. So as that virus leaves, something else has to take its place. And that's what the information pillars, the white light pillars, did, is it replaced the viral information, I'm quoting here, that was in Kowloong, and it replaced it with the Akasha information. And that's why Akasha was virus-free at the end of the fight. And I know it sounds kind of ass-pully, but it's really not when you think about it. We've seen this happen. Everything we've seen in this chapter has happened at one point or another in some other chapter, or has been set up and explained. So like, for example, right, Chu's frame, right? Chu just kind of doo-doo-doo, and she gets her Shukra frame, and it just kind of shows up. It just appears, right? Like, we know in the digital space of like Akasha and Huashu, it doesn't really matter because it's the digital space, but then it also just shows up in reality, and you're like, how did this get here? I mean, we've seen it before. It happened to Alpha. That's how Alpha got her Crimson Weave form, right? The virus just transferred the information, quote, from the tower, and it was just a bit more violent. The way it happened to her, it was just more violent. So the virus replaced the information that made up her frame and replaced that with the Crimson Weave information to give her a new frame, right? Because as Schultz says at the end, right, souls, matter, DNA, but the important one is matter, right? It's also just an expression of information. So, what Akasha did is the same as what the Ascension Network did. It just replaced the information of the matter that made up Chu's frame and gave her the Shukra frame, and then, got rid of the virus inside of her too. As for where we get like the design for it, I don't know. You can probably call it like the personification of Kowloong given like physical form. And that's what, Shukra is, which, if it is supposed to be made of just like the will of Kowloong, shout out to whoever gave her the boots, because the boots are real cute. Cough. Also the chest buff. That is greatly appreciated. So, at the very end, Ishmael is talking about the law of conservation of energy, right? And saying that perhaps that also applies to information. So, energy cannot be created or destroyed, right? So I guess it's saying that information also cannot be created or destroyed. It can only be changed. So I guess that's why they're saying you can't just destroy the punishing virus, is you either have to change it into something else or move it and replace it with something else. You can't just destroy it. So I kind of have to default and say maybe that's the law that they were talking about way back in 21, because they have never stated an outright like law that they were talking about. They always just say the law, break the law. And this is the first time they've talked about, an actual one by name. So maybe this is what they're trying to find. They're trying to find a way to either create or destroy energy or information. Confusion? Maybe? I don't know. Let's see. I think that's really all I have to talk about right now until I, remember something else 20 minutes after I finish the video. But some stuff I cut, right? I already went over like the church, but there's also a conversation between Villiers and Lue, and they're talking about like squirrels, but they're not actually talking about squirrels. They're talking about the mechanoids, and they were saying that even if you cut down all the trees in the forest, eventually squirrels will still create their own civilization, and that's supposed to reference Schultz and his deletion. So even if you try to delete this awakened machine, they will eventually still create their own civilization. They will still evolve on their own, and eventually they'll make their own civilization, even if you try and like hamper their efforts. There's also a scene I cut of Lando's funeral, and Lustrous was actually there, and she tells us that had Lando not died, he would have been the one to lead Atlantis. And there's also a couple of scenes from Kowloong, right, from like where they are fighting, and some citizens are like locked in a nuclear reactor, and they're like, we're getting overrun and we can't let the virus take over this facility, and so they blow up the facility, right? They nuke it, right? They melt down the reactor, and big explosion. It's just a little sacrifice scene, but, it shows you how bad it was for Kowloong. Like, Kowloong was really getting stomped. It was not going good for them. They were having a really bad time. I think that's really it. But, okay, so like I was saying at the end of the video, right? Why did it take so long to get out? It had nothing to do with the length of the chapter. It had everything to do with this horrific editing issue. And I don't even know what the issue was, but let me just describe to you what was happening. Right, so like 80-90% of the video is the background sprite conversations, right, to take up space. And I screen record those off my phone, and then I put them into like a YouTube converter, and it usually spits them out just a bit smaller. And I usually screen record those off of my phone, but if you've ever done a screen recording off of iPhones or like iDevices, they're super, super heavy. So what I did was I usually put them into like a YouTube converter, and then I re-download them, and they come out, a bit lighter so that my projects are not, 100 gigabytes. And this time when I was editing those background clips, for some reason, anytime I was editing the background clips, and it was only the background clips, they would slow down my software and cause it to like buffer. And this isn't like a little bit of buffer. I mean, every single movement was accompanied by like a 5-10 second buffer. Every pause, every play, every insert clip, cut, stretch, paste, everything, each individual action was accompanied by like a 10-second delay. And when you're sitting there, pause, start, stop, it was so bad to the point where it was taking me hours to edit minutes. And I don't mean like 1 hour for 10 minutes. I mean 1 hour per minute. Oh, that was so bad. It was so bad. It was so not fun. I remember sitting there and I was like, man, it's 11 o'clock. I've been editing since 11. It's 1 o'clock now. How much did I get done? I got done 2 minutes and 40 seconds. I screamed. And the worst part is, I don't even know what caused it, because it's not like it was some like new thing that I've done. I've been doing it for the longest time. But whatever. Of course it would happen on the longest chapter in the game, of course. Like, it couldn't have happened on something short like 24. Had to be Polaris Bond. That's the one they decided. It was Schultz. I'm blaming Schultz. Schultz was like, nah man, I hate all humans. That includes you too. But now, I guess we are finally getting into, the start of the sync patch chapters. after 6 months. Oh my god, 6 months. When we started sync patches, I was 10 chapters behind. Now we're 6 months into sync patches and I'm still 10 chapters behind. I might have to actually like really change how I do these, because I also would like to catch up. I really do want to catch up. Like, I don't read ahead. I'm only on chapter 28. But of course I can't talk. I can't talk about anything. I can't discuss the chapters because everybody's so far ahead. I have no one to talk to. I have to talk to myself. I have to make videos and talk to myself in the back of the house. Because everybody's like, yeah, man, you didn't know that? That's old information. We learned that 4 months ago. I feel like that meme of that guy who's like celebrating on the podium, and then it zooms out and he's in 3rd place. And the other guys are just looking at him like, dude, come on. We've been way past that. I'm so sad. But yeah, the thing is, I really like the way I do them now, which is of course why I've been doing it this way for so long. I do enjoy it, but I also really want to catch up. So, I gotta decide between the enjoyment, right? How much do I enjoy making the video, and will I enjoy making it a different way, versus, you know, the desire to catch up. By the way, that's where you guys' feedback definitely comes in. Your feedback, very, very much helpful. Let me know. Let me know how you feel about the way I do them now. If you want some changes, if you want to make a suggestion or something. Or also, definitely, if you've like read the chapter, if you yourself have read the chapter, but also have seen the video, definitely tell me how I did. Tell me if there's something that I didn't explain clearly or that you don't understand. So I can definitely make sure that, I can watch out for that in the next script. Because if you don't understand what I'm talking about, there's literally no point to the video. Get out the video, you're like, what happened? I don't know what happened. Like, okay, then what was the point of watching this then? If you don't want to leave a comment, you can always send me a message on Discord. It's on the description of every video. But anyway, I don't know how to make outros. Bye.